New Jersey. It is my great pleasure to introduce today's speaker, author and artist Ed Lam. Many of us became familiar with Ed's work through his groundbreaking and superbly illustrated of the Northeast, which represents a perfect conjunction of art and science. His latest work, the very heavy and magisterial Butterflies of North America, features about 1,900 paintings and drawings and covers all 329 species of North American dragonflies. Tonight, we will be joining Ed on his artistic and literal journey as he explains the long and challenging process of making a field guide. Please help me welcome author and artist Ed Lam.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, so thank you for coming. First of all, I want to thank Joyce and Edmund, who is not here, for inviting me to the meeting and coming out to New Jersey. I live in Southern New York. I live in Westchester County. So it was about an hour and a half to drive here in the traffic. But many of you probably know, is that New Jersey actually is one of the best places in North America to look for dragonflies. I believe there are 188 species of dragonflies and damselflies that have been recorded in New Jersey, which I think ranks only behind 3 other states. I think New York, Virginia, and Texas have more, but they're all much bigger states. What's kind of special about New Jersey is that it ranges north to south. It's small, but it has a lot of different habitats. You have the highlands up in Sussex County. You have the Pine Barrens. You have the coastal plain. It's just, you have a wide variety of species here. And some of my fondest memories of dragonflying and butterflying is going from New York and driving out to Sussex County and then going down to the Pine Barrens. That's kind of where I kind of cut my teeth looking at these organisms and learning them. And that's kind of have led me to eventually make this dragonfly field guide, which is what I'm here to talk about. Now, that's a lot of days. That's the equivalent of 18 years. And unfortunately, that is not an exaggeration. I signed a contract back in 2006 to produce what was supposed to be a Peterson field guide. It was supposed to be the Peterson field guide to North American dragonflies. Suffice it to say, I grossly underestimated the amount of time it would take to finish it. And there were a lot of reasons for that, and mainly because I had a growing family, and it's hard to write books when you are trying to support a family. This is my oldest boy. He's holding a couple of dragonflies. He's about 6 in this photograph, maybe 5 or 6, but he was only 1 year old when I started the book, and he was in his 2nd year in college when it came out last fall. Now, I had published a previous book called Damselflies of the Northeast, which is this book. This book covered 70 species of northeastern, mostly northeastern and and eastern Canada. And it took 2 years to complete. So, but the new book includes more than 4 times the number, about 329 species, and its coverage include the entire continental US and Canada plus Alaska. And it was a long, tortured journey to make the book, but now that it's finished, I'm pleased to say that I still like dragonflies. And this is a golden wing skimmer. And why not like them? They are incredible creatures. They are among the oldest known insects. I like to imagine that they were, and they definitely were, that they were flying above the heads of dinosaurs, and we would recognize them. They are considered the fastest flying insects, and a recent study named them the most efficient animal predator with the highest success per hunt. They also have a really fascinating life story with separate aquatic and terrestrial chapters. The males have 2 sets of reproductive organs, which leads to a mating position that is unique amongst other insects. But I'm gonna skip that for another talk. This is a spangled skimmer. This is a species we have around here. Dragonflies are easy to recognize. They all have large eyes, slim bodies, and with a long abdomen and 4 long, intricately veined wings. And there are a few other insects that may look like dragonflies, such as antlions, mayflies, fish flies, may suggest dragonflies. But unlike them, dragonflies have small antennae. You can barely notice as an antenna. They are often large for insects, many measuring 2 to 3 inches in length. This is a giant darner from the southwest, which can be more than 4.5 inches in length. Many are strongly patterned, like this white belted ringtail from the southwest. And they can be brightly colored, like this calico pennant, a species that we find around here. Now, dragonflies are often conspicuous and easy to observe. This is a roseate skimmer, which is a common but really spectacular species found along the southern states. Unlike birds, you don't have to be a morning person to look at dragonflies. Most dragonflies have to warm up to be active, and so they are often best seen on sunny days. We often find them at water, so lakes and ponds and rivers and streams, places that people like to go to, especially when the weather gets warm. But despite this familiarity, you might be surprised to hear that there were not any field guides to North American dragonflies until the year 2000. When you contrast this with other organisms like birds, that seems pretty amazing. Now, Audubon produced his great work, The Birds of North America, in the 1820s and 30s. Of course, that's not a field guide, but it was at the time the most complete and accurate catalog of North American bird life. What is often considered the first bird field guide is Birds Through an Opera Glass by Florence Merriam It was published in 1889. And it focused on identification and was small enough to be actually taken into the field. Now, other birds got more guides. This is including the first pocket guide by Chester Reed, which was published in 1905, I believe. Now, in this guide, those lengthy descriptions and anecdotes and life histories that were featured in many bird books at the time were pared down to just, simple descriptions. And the illustrations actually show both species, both sexes. And I have read that this guide was Roger Torrey Peterson's first bird guide, and it was given to him while he was a 7th grade student. And of course, Peterson would publish his own guide in 1934 when he was in his 20s. Now, Peterson minimized the text even more. There's very little text in the Peterson's guide, making the illustrations and figures the heart of the book. Now, Peterson drew and designed the plates. He putting similar groups together, presented in similar poses to aid comparison. The drawings were simple, black and white, very diagrammatical, but his intent was to show what a bird looked like at a distance. Now, his later guides the illustrations became more detailed, but that's more of a reflection on the kind of optics that were available and the improvement of optics, so our views got better and better. And that also relates to how we looked at how we started looking at dragonflies more closely. Now, the success of the Peterson guides spawned a whole series of field guides that continue to be out in his name. Starting in 1950s, there were guides to butterflies, mammals, reptiles, rocks and minerals, animal tracks, and later there were guides to ferns and trees and wildflowers. Now, in 1970, there was a general insect guide published as a Peterson, and it only included 5 species of dragonflies and 3 species of damselflies, which is hardly useful. And later on, there were other organisms like beetles and moths got their own field guides, but why not dragonflies? Now, I started looking at dragonflies in the 1990s. I, like many of you, began as a bird watcher, but after the spring rush ended, I still wanted to be outside, so summers were spent looking at insects like butterflies and dragonflies. But without a field guide, the best reference for identifying dragonflies was a manual by James Needham and Minter Westfall's Dragonflies of North America, which was originally published in the 1950s. It's a heavy, large technical manual best suited for identifying specimens in the hand. It provided these dichotomous keys to identify species. This is an example of 2 species that we call amberwings. And if you read it, it talks about some of a nation character. So a character that you would find in the wings. So you see that for one species, Domitia, the triangles in the fore and hind wings without cross veins, and then triangles in the hind wings, and usually the forewings with cross veins. So one has cross veins, one doesn't have cross veins. Make sense? And this is what it looks like. So this is the triangle. It's right up here. And one indeed has cross veins, but the other one doesn't. So that's the point they used to identify the two species. So let's look at the whole organism. So you can see why they're called amber wings. Males have these bright yellow wings. And these are very small species, we have a similar species in our area, the eastern amber wing, which is very widespread, and you do see them when you're out. These species you can find in the south, in Texas, into the southwest. You can, in general, you can see that they look very similar, but if you look closely, there is some differences in patterning. Pay particularly attention to the pattern on the abdomen. One has some pale stripes, the other one doesn't seem to have that. And here's a view from the side. The same two species. Now look at the side of the thorax. One definitely has stripes, some brown stripes, and the other one doesn't. So and these do turn out to be consistent marks for these species. So you would think that something like this would be noted in the identification key. And they definitely seem to be easier to see than looking for that triangle. I mean, the triangle is visible there. You can look for that triangle there. Now, again, these species are very small, and the wings are only about 3/4 of an inch long. So that triangle is very tiny. But what's important to understand is that a lot of the anatomical characters in the manual come from working from collected specimens. It's not surprising since most of our natural sciences are built upon collecting, but for dragonflies, that can be problematic because when a dragonfly dies, we lose a lot of the patterning. They quickly lose their patterning to decomposition. And even though we have learned methods to help preserve pattern today, we soak specimens in acetone now to dissolve fats. It's still very hard to preserve things. Color tends to always fade, and features like eye color, which can be amazingly striking in life. It could be a bright color, a bright blue, an emerald green. All that is lost in a specimen. So things that are very obvious when you see a live dragonfly, a lot of that is lost. So so these early people who are working out the taxonomy, who are looking at collections and naming species, only have these specimens, and because they're lacking living color and pattern, it's hard to fault them from relying on anatomical characters because they were most present. Now, 25 years ago, there was a lot of skepticism about identifying dragonflies in the field. I remember talking to someone with a lifetime of experience, and he said that the only dragonfly that he thought might be field identifiable reliably was a male comet darter, which is what this is. A very distinctive red abdomen, And it's a very distinct, there's nothing really like it in our fauna. And I'm sure he was exaggerating a bit, but the skepticism towards field identification was very real. Dragonflies can be really challenging to observe well. They are wary, they can fly, and for most people who were studying dragonflies at the time, collecting was the norm. Yeah, but attitudes began to change, especially by an improvement in optics. Manufacturers started making and marketing for nature observers close focus binoculars. Like Pentax even named one of their models the Papilio, which was, which means butterfly. And so they're marketing to people like us here at the Butterfly Club. With these, you didn't have to step back to look at something in the field. You could see something small at close range that had the magnification enough to see these fine details. Advances in photography have also been invaluable. With digital cameras, macro photography became a lot more accessible. This is actually the first dragonfly photo I ever took, which was about 2001. It was a little Nikon Coolpix, a point and shoot, which I bought because a friend of mine had one, and I loved the macro capability of it. Having a camera actually really changed the way I interacted with nature, because now I was carrying a camera with me. Of course, nowadays with the right equipment, people are able to take pictures of dragonflies even while in flight. It's amazing. That was unheard of back then. And because we now have all these tools, we have a better idea what living dragonflies actually look like. So things like pattern and color have become more important for field identification. Now, by 2000, these developments led to the first dragonfly field guide, which arrived in 2000. This is Dragonflies Through Binoculars by Sidney Dunkel. As you can tell, it's very title and that kind of announced this fundamental change in dragonfly identification. Now, I was looking for, I had heard about this book coming out, and I remember how exciting it was when this book came out. Together in one volume were all these photographs of all the species from across the continent, and most I had never even saw photographs of. As to its approach on identification, I was curious how it would handle the most difficult problems, like these species and groups that are very similar in appearance. We knew that they were a problem. They would always be a problem. Could you really separate the toughest groups like these meadowhawks with black legs that we have here in the Northeast? Now, Dunkel's book didn't solve this problem, and which is understandable because even today we still have this problem. And he certainly acknowledged there were many challenges to identification, for field identification. Going back to 1889, Florence Merriam thought that only 90% of birds were identifiable through the opera glass. Now, that doesn't seem too bad considering what an early stage bird watching was in. And certainly we've improved that percentage quite a bit. I would imagine that we can identify more than 90% now. So in 2000, we were still kind of at that early point, and so there was reason to believe that we still had plenty to learn. So these are a couple of damselflies. These are a couple of ramber forktails. They're mating. That's that unique position that dragonflies and damselflies have. Since we now had this great new dragonfly guide, personally, I started focusing my attention on damselflies. Now, I had heard, similar to dragonflies, that most damselflies couldn't be identified in the field. I had been told over and over that was the case. And I wanted to know if it was true, and I wanted to know if it was true, to what extent. And so I started focusing on the species that were listed for New York and New Jersey. And I went and tried to find them. And so I took pictures, I took specimens, and I took a lot of notes. And from the materials I gathered, I compiled my own little booklet. And I printed it out in my little inkjet printer at the time and made some copies and gave them to some friends who are also interested in looking at these organisms. And if we found what seemed to be a good field mark, we wrote it in. If we found that a field mark didn't actually pan out, we would omit it. But after a couple of seasons, we thought we knew enough that it could potentially be a real book. Also, this was just post 9/11, and I worked as an illustrator at the time, and much of my work kind of dried up after 9/11, if you remember the economy back then. And so I actually kind of welcomed having time to do this project. Now, my background is in art, so my plan was to illustrate the guide using my own using paintings instead of photographs. But I needed good reference for my illustrations. So it was clear that I needed to find them myself. And for the guide to be more useful, I expanded the range to cover the entire Northeast. So I went and began collecting beyond New York and New Jersey. I went north to Ontario, south to Virginia, west all the way to Nebraska, and mainly seeking specific species. And my methodology at the time was fairly simple. After catching a dragonfly, I photographed them. I tried to photograph them in a controlled environment, and that's where the digital camera was really useful. Now, I tried to maintain consistent views, which proved challenging since I was photographing living damselflies at the time. Because I wanted them living because I thought their poses would be more natural. But of course, insects are not particularly cooperative, and there was plenty of times where something would get loose and I would have to chase it around the room. And here's some of the original artwork for the damselfly guide. These were painted on paper. And the result was Damselflies of the Northeast, which was published in 2004. It was well received, and I was happy that people seem to find it useful. I tried to make clear what was field identifiable and what was not. And for those species that weren't field identifiable, I tried to give enough figures and information for them to identify something in the hand. After finishing this book, I had no plans to do another book. but it only took a couple of years later, and I was tempted by a literary agent who was convinced that there was time for, and there was a good time to make a fully illustrated Dragonfly guide. Now, I was skeptical, but I thought I'd give it a try and see what happened. Now, in my proposal to potential publishers, I tried to describe how my book would be different from other guides, especially Dunkel's, which, since I would be covering the same territory. I wrote that the complete guide would have to have in-hand characters for the most, and I wanted to make them accessible enough and more accessible than in the technical manual. It would have to be extensively illustrated because showing a feature is always better than trying to write it and describe it in words. Unlike Dunkel's guide and other Dragonfly guides that followed, my proposed guide would use illustrations. For field guides, there's often a debate which is better, photographs or drawings or paintings. We see both approaches in bird field guides. Peterson, National Geographic, used paintings, while Kaufman and Crossley uses photographs. I'm sure each approach has its advantages and disadvantages, and I'm sure we all have our favorites. As an artist, I'm inclined to favor illustrations, but I also think it depends on the subject. For butterflies, for example, I think butterflies through binoculars is the right guide, because I think photography is the right medium for butterflies rather than illustrating butterflies. Dragonflies, when you try to photograph a dragonfly, they can be very difficult to photograph because you often want to fill the frame with its wings because it's such an integral part of the dragonfly. But when you fill a frame with the wings, the bodies become very small in the frame. The wings, of course, many of them are transparent. So what's behind the dragonfly, what the background affects the appearance, vastly. Now it's certainly possible to take good pictures of dragonflies, but it's hard to do it consistently. With illustrations, you can eliminate all the backgrounds and you can control the lighting and make all the viewpoints more uniform. Your viewpoints and postures can be maintained, which helps in the comparison of species. Now here's a sample, one of my sample layouts that was in the proposal. Now, there were a couple other dragonflies guides in the works. Princeton had Dennis Paulson's guides in the works back at this time. There was another guide that was being proposed by Nick Donnelly at the time, which unfortunately never came to publication. Knopf showed some interest, but just wasn't sure there was a market for another dragonfly guide. So in the end, I ended up accepting kind of a rather modest contract with Houghton Mifflin to do the Peterson Field Guide. So I started work on the book in earnest in 2007. And the first few years were devoted to gathering that reference material, the reference material that I needed to make the illustrations. By far, it was the most enjoyable part of the project because I got to travel around the continent and also got to meet a whole community of dragonfly enthusiasts. This is a red rock skimmer from the Southwest. I traveled to New Mexico, California, Oregon, Washington. I went north into Canada. This is a blue-faced ringtail from Texas. And I went to many places in between: Missouri, Iowa, Nebraska, Arkansas. I spent a lot of time in the Southeast, especially in Florida. I made multiple trips there because there are many species that are found there and nowhere else, like this purple skimmer. This is found only locally in northern Florida. Now, I spent a lot of time collecting in Texas, especially in the Rio Grande Valley, because of the species that just barely make it over the border. If you're hoping to ever see or find something new for the US, the border's where you want to be. And this is the Rio Grande in West Texas. Now, in 2008, I was able to get permits to collect at both Benson State Park and at Santa Ana National Wildlife Refuge, which was pretty cool to do. And I made 4 trips down to the valley that year. But before my second trip, there had been a dragonfly that was a new US record that was photographed in Benson. And that was this Mexican scarlet tail that you see here. So I was really excited to go see it. We were going to be able to collect it, and it would, we would deposit the collected specimens at the University of Texas. But while looking for the scarlet tail, we spotted another red dragonfly as it flew by us. And my friend Fabrice Delacour, who was with me on that trip, he netted it. And it turned out to be this species. This is Terophylla argo. And at the time, the species didn't have a common name because we never, species didn't get common names unless it crossed the border and it became a US or a Canada record. Now, I'm not sure if that's still the case, but that's the case. It didn't have a common name at the time. Now it's called an arch-tipped glider because its appendages, if you look at its appendages, there are an arch. Now, it was certainly a thrill to add a new US record, and but it had to be added to the book now. And so inadvertently, I ended up making more work for myself. And here's its species account. That's the one to the left. Now, I changed my methodology a little bit for dragonflies. Instead of just photographed them like I did with the damselflies, I scanned specimens on a flatbed scanner. Now, it was a good method because there is a certain consistency in lighting and points of view. And plus, there were a few other people at the time who were also scanning dragonflies. So the material they had done, I could use. And this is a Macromia magnifica, which is, I believe, Western River cruiser. And this is a side scan of a twin-spotted spiketail. You can see why they're called a spiketail. So I knew I wasn't going to collect every species, but as an illustrator, I knew I could take different source material and kind of combine and construct an illustration and yet still have them consistent with all the other illustrations in the book. So of those 18 years, most of it was spent doing the illustrations. Early on, I decided to do dorsal views of the female dragonflies, which is something I didn't have in the damselfly book. So just deciding that I wanted an extra view meant I had to do it for every species. So that's adding hundreds of illustrations just with that one decision. Now, this is a black petal tail from the Pacific Northwest. Now, here are some of the finished illustrations. We have that bar on top there. So that female is on the right and the male's on the left. So working for my own scans, it was relatively easy to do an illustration. Piecing it together took a lot much longer. And with nearly 200 different illustrations planned, one of the biggest decisions I made was to do the illustrations digitally.
I think you may be able to
I don't know.
click the bar at the top.
I don't have the bar.
Oh, that is weird that it's
Yeah.
on there, but
Yeah, I don't. I think that might be your.
I do not have anything on the
Okay.
screen.
All right, I'm so, we're wondering what that bar on top of the screen. Anyway, so deciding to do artwork digitally was kind of new to me. I'm kind of an old school person, so I was used to doing things with paint and paper, but not having to physically paint saved time, because think of all the times I would have to stop and mix a color. Think about all the brushes that had to be maintained. And there's also the expense of having to buy the brushes and the paint and the paper and also storing all this material. So having 2,000 paintings sitting around your house was rather daunting. So doing a digital illustration is definitely the way to go. Oops, sorry about that. I'll do that. I was also responsible for the book's layout, and one of the biggest challenges was the Peterson, was the size of the Peterson guide. I knew from the very beginning that that was going to be a problem. Even when I signed the contract, my damselfly guide is 5.5 inches by 8.5 inches large. A Peterson guide page is 30% smaller because it's designed to be a guide that's supposed to be carried in the field. I wanted to maintain a similar layout with the damselfly guide, but I certainly worried about getting it all to fit, and losing 30% is a lot. And one of the biggest criticism, I think, of the other Dragonfly field guides, that especially the ones that use photographs, were the fact that the photographs are very small and making very hard to see what you want to see. So it's very important to me that my illustrations be reproduced as large as possible. Now, fortunately, those problems of size vanished when Houghton Mifflin and the Peterson field guides were sold in 2022. And Princeton University acquired my contract. That change definitely helped re-energize the project, and things start to flow again. And I was able to kind of disregard some of those Peterson idiosyncrasies, but most importantly, I increased the page size. So, and the first thing I did was just blow up the figures as large as I could. So the book is closer to my original vision. I wanted a book that did justice to the beauty and the sheer variety of dragonflies. And so the heart of the book is its plates. And with only a couple of exceptions, each species has its own plate. There are a few species in the books that have enough variations to warrant 2 pages. This is bandwing meadowhawk, so there is an eastern and a western form of it. At the top of each species account, is a description, of course, and which also includes some field marks and their breeding habitat. And each species is represented by at least 4 images of both males and females from the top and from the side. And I often put additional details if there was needed, like the face patterns and some anatomical figures got mixed in as well. And there's in the physical book, there's an actual size silhouette, which gives you an idea of how large these things actually are. And of course, on the bottom is the all-important similar species, which tells you what to look for and how to separate them. After the species accounts, there are 43 pages of in-the-hand characters. These are male appendages, female subgenital plates, and other anatomical features that you may need. It's not necessary for all the species, but I kind of wanted to, once I started working on one group, I wanted to kind of fill in all the, I kind of wanted to make sure everyone had it. I don't want to just do a couple and just the hard ones. Let's have the easy ones too, so you can compare. Now, these anatomical features are for the species that are the hardest to identify, because even though we've made great improvements in field identification and we've increased our knowledge and our optics have become better, there still remains some identification problems that are stubbornly resistant to our being able to identify. There are just some species that are separated only from the shape of their appendages. So you have really no choice if you actually want to identify some species. A lot of times you'll end up with a pair of species or a group of species, and you can say, well, that's a meadowhawk. We're not quite sure which one it is. But it's okay. I recognize that not everyone wants to net dragonflies, and dragonflies are difficult to do. So there remains challenges. My book, I feel like, is a kind of a hybrid. It's a field guide with field marks, but also I wanted to give everyone enough information that if they wanted to take the next step and actually catch things and separate the most difficult ones, I wanted that information to be in the book. And finally, Most of you will recognize these figures. These are the end papers from Roger Torrey Peterson's bird field guide, silhouettes of perched and flying birds. Like many of you, I grew up with this book, and I was always drawn to these pages. They were just something that I just loved looking at. And although I did not end up making a Peterson, they were the inspiration for some of the silhouettes that I included in the book, some flight silhouettes and some perch silhouettes. So I feel like even though it's not a Peterson, it's part of the family. And that's it. I thank you all for coming tonight. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to take them. And please take a look at the book if you haven't. And if you use the book, I hope you find it useful. So thank you very much. Yes.
There been DNA studies done on them to really identify the separate species?
Yes, there's certainly been DNA done on many groups now, and sometimes the DNA helps and sometimes it doesn't. Yeah, we find that sometimes the separation isn't there. That and certainly things have been, taxonomy is always being revised. There was recently the group of spike tails, which in my book is in the genus Cordialigaster, is now changed because of a study that I'm not sure if that one actually, I have to, my memory of that is not too clear whether it was DNA based, but it certainly was a study and it separates. So some of the names are already obsolete in my book after a year later. So that happens. Yes.
I'm curious what program you use for the digital work?
I use Photoshop. Yep, I just use Photoshop with, I have, I use different brushes. I do, I like layering. It was kind of important to me that they still kind of look like my paintings. They don't look like I didn't want it to be obvious to people who look at it and think, oh, that's just digitally done. Whatever that means. I didn't want them to be too slick or anything like that. The interesting thing about digital work that until I started doing it, is that it's kind of like an endless resolution. Like you can always zoom in when you're doing digital. You can blow it up more digitally. When you were physically painting, a lot of it was restricted to the size of the paper, right? So what the level of detail level depended on how big you painted it. But with a digital painting, when you're working on it, you can blow it up and you can get closer and closer. So so I kind of worried about adding too much detail to my illustrations because, I could add, almost a limited amount of resolution into it, but it wouldn't reproduce anyway, especially in a book that, that is reproduced at 300 dots per inch, it just, so that was an interesting thing, changing from a analog world to the digital world. Yeah.
It's a prodigious amount of work there. I'm surprised it only took you 18 years.
Well, it wasn't a constant 18 years.
My question is, where did you get the information for the range maps?
A lot of it is, well, the main source is Odonata Central. A lot of that combines records from, pretty much all the records that we have. A lot of it's based on Nick Donnelly's dot map. And also it's like, it compiles other people's observations. So that became the most complete single source. It's actually gotten a little easier because it is kind of all in one place now. I remember back when I was doing the damselfly guide, and essentially you were looking at different state lists, like different sources. It's kind of nice that the information is more or less compiled in one place now. So that was helpful. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they're talking about mating in the air. I have many pictures of perch dragons and damsels on vegetation. I've seen them flying in tandem, post mating, etc. depositing eggs. So how often did you encounter pairs that were actually in a full mating?
It's rare that they stay that way. I mean, you will see them fly, but generally, I believe they will perch. There's only because the duration of mating varies quite a bit between species. Some will, the mating wheel can take, take an hour or moments. It varies a great deal. So you certainly do see tandem pairs in the mating wheel, but often it's only temporary until they alight somewhere else.
With butterflies, you have to worry about the scales and touching. How do you collect them and you then release them? They don't.
There's a lot of people who look at dragonflies and do catch and release. So unlike butterflies, they do not have scales on their wings, and their wings are actually quite strong. So we actually do learn, and there's a figure in my book of holding the wings together. So as long as you hold all four wings together, you have to keep your hands clean. You got to keep your hands dry. And if you hold them together to immobilize the wings, they can't hurt themselves. And usually it's a good way to hold them and be able to release them. Now, of course, you don't want to hold them too long. You don't want to hold them in the sun. So you be careful. Anytime handling the dragonflies usually don't hurt them unless they're very young. If they just emerge from their aquatic stage, their bodies and their wings are not hardened up enough to be handled. So we always warn people about handling what they call a teneral. So their bodies are soft, their wings are soft. Don't want to handle them if you want to release them. The hardest part about catching dragonflies is catching them, not so much handling them. Dragonflies are very elusive, and you need an aerial net usually, and you will be very frustrated. I mean, even the most experienced person who's studying dragonflies, it can be very frustrating to see something flying 30 feet above your head and not be able to even swing a net at it. So it is challenging. It's not for everyone, but it's okay. I mean, in my book, I do talk about netting, but it's mainly about whatever level of involvement you're comfortable with. I mean, most people don't want to collect, which is perfectly fine. Most people don't want a net, which is perfectly fine. But just know that there are certain limitations that you won't be able to, you'll be able to narrow it down to a group, a genus. But you may not be able to actually say, oh, that's this particular species. Right, so. Yes. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's wonderful.
I've never seen that many.
Well, swarm, yes, some dragonflies do feed in swarms, and it is really, it is magical if like that. Yeah.
Would they be migrating?
We have some species that migrate. A lot of the swarms could be migrating, but it's usually a feeding thing. They're feeding. Something is flying there that's concentrating, and they're, as you know, dragonflies are, they're predators, they're carnivorous, they eat other insects. So if there's a, good supply of flying insects, they will gravitate there. So yeah, swarms are really wonderful, and we're always hoping to find one. Doesn't always happen. Yeah. No, well, that's great.
It was. No, it's a great swamp, but it's that platform. No, not the observation rail. No, the one right opposite the fencing house.
Yeah. Yes.
They actually have a function.
Well, any function is speculative. I believe I think if I recall, it's someone speculated that they had something to do with detecting their wind speed. They obviously don't, dragonflies apparently don't hear, they don't, they certainly, they don't have, feathery antennas to pick up, chemical signals. The most obvious, their most obvious sense is their vision, of course, because if you look at a dragonfly, they have, very big eyes. They have the largest compound eyes in the insect world. As you can see, it covers their entire head, and there's like thousands of facets, and they can see in all directions except directly behind. So they are very good at seeing and detecting their prey. And they are definitely refined. They are certainly refined predators that, there are, some of the earliest dragonflies, our most primitive dragonflies are the petal tails, and they arose. There are fossil petal tails that we recognize as petal tails from 200 million years ago. So somehow they came upon this body plan and stuck with it because it was so successful. So.
Wasps, they have 3 other eyes that are mostly light.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. They also have 3. We call them. They're called the ocelli. Dragonflies also have them on top of the head. I don't know if I have a figure that shows that well here, but. Anybody else? Yes.
Can you reveal to us your current project?
My current project.
Beans on Facebook.
Well, I do plan to revise Damselflies of the Northeast to, at this point, I'm just going to, for my own sanity right now, I'm thinking of only expanding it to cover the east. So anything east of the Mississippi. And maybe eventually someday I'll venture and do a second volume to do the west. But that would be an entirely new book. Revising Damselflies of the Northeast to cover the east. I only have to add about, I forgot the number already, but it's like about 20 species. So it's not a huge, it's not as a huge chunk to do. So I hope to get that done in the next year or so.
Sounds good.
Okay. Is anyone on
Some
Zoom?
questions from Zoomers. Yep. And
Okay.
some positive comments. So,
Okay.
Mark asks if there are signed books available.
I have some books. They can be made available. They can contact me via, I guess, via email, and we can work out some way of getting them to them. My email, I don't know if I can.
I can put it in the chat.
Okay, it's Azure Bluet, AZUREBLUET at
Okay.
AOL. I'm old school. AOL.com. And just say that you're interested and we can work out.
All right, you already covered this, but James asked, Ed, any plans for the obvious follow-up field guide, Damselflies of North America?
Yeah, well,
21 more species, hopefully in the next year.
hopefully I'll be done. I actually don't have a publisher for it yet. I haven't actually checked with Princeton if they're interested, but in any case, I mean, in any case, I'll finish it and get it, and we'll get it out eventually in some way. But yeah, east first. I don't think I want to wade into the west just yet.
Okay,
Just a little break.
all right, and then Ellen asks, are you selling the book? And if so, where can we all purchase copies?
Purchase copies of, well, I hate to say it, but Amazon is selling it for a quite a discount. It's like 50% off. So it's like $17-18 to, so if you don't mind buying from Amazon, it doesn't, it makes no difference to me. I mean, I don't know what to say. It's like, yeah, I mean, the Amazon price is cheaper than my price if I bought from Princeton with my author's discount. My author's discount is 40%, but they're selling it already for almost 50%. So it's cheaper for me to buy it from Amazon than getting it from Princeton.
So Jack Holloway is also working on a couple of books, including one that is
Awesome.
a Damselfly book that is 99% complete.
Yes.
And there are some author-related questions.
Okay.
So what things, if any, would you do differently about publishing?
About publishing. That's, I think I need some more specifics about that. I mean, my publishing experience is I have two books, vastly different experiences. The first one was large, even though it's published by Biodiversity Books was a nonprofit, a friend set up. He wanted to do this. This is Guy Tudor, who's still around, by the way, but he's quite, Uh, he's a bit infirm these days. So that was a little different. So largely the first book was a self-publish, largely self-published, self-made, self-published. The second book, because it was under contract, you know, I was trying so hard to make it into a Peterson. And I never really resolved the problems. I moved things around. You know, uh, I just, it's hard to, I would not sign a contract like that where you have to make so many compromises just to get the book done, just to get someone to take the book. I would, you know, I joke about Amazon being so cheap, and I'm thinking to myself, how does that affect, you know, if, even though you kind of put your heart and soul into a book and you think to yourself, well, it's only been out for a few months. Why are they discounting it so much? So even though I know it's a business, somehow it works business-wise for somebody here. I don't know if it works for Princeton. I don't know if it works for Amazon. It doesn't really work. It hasn't been great for me. I certainly don't make any money from after having published this, but I don't know. That's why I'm kind of almost tempted to, if I revise Damselflies to Damselflies of the East, I'm tempted to self-publish again. That way I control it and I can, you know, I mean, it's kind of a pain. Back in the days when Damselflies of the Northeast first came out, I mailed like thousands of copies personally. I mean, I got the orders. I'm the one who packaged them up and sent them out. I went to going to the post office. So it's a lot of work, but I don't know. I found that a little bit more satisfying than having the book, just kind of out there and, controlled by entities that I have no control over. So I don't know. I don't know if that's what you're asking. Just be true to your vision. Stick with it. Fight for it. And hopefully it works out. And I'm sure we will definitely appreciate, whatever the work Jack, I mean, from what I've seen, it will be spectacular. So.
Jack had two other questions as well. So he also asked, how did you go about finding and attracting a publisher? And also if you know if an ebook only route without printing for ID guys is something of interest or not.
For me, digital, I'm an old school. I love books. I wanted this to be a book. I've actually never seen, I know they sell an electronic version of this book. I've actually not even looked at it because I don't know what I would gain from looking at it on the screen that I've obviously have looked at my book on my computer screen for 18 years. So I mean, the thrill for me was seeing it as a book and that you can flip through the pages and you would see hundreds of species and you can see the variety, you can see the different shapes and the different patterns, and it's just kind of a kaleidoscope. You don't get that effect with digital. I'm sure digital is attractive, especially a lot of people today only look at digital stuff and want it on their phone. I'm sure it will be useful in that format, but it doesn't really unless someone develops an app that knocks my socks off, it doesn't really appeal to me personally. But, you know, my background is in art, so, you know, I want people to see the art. What was the other question?
It was, how did you go about attracting and finding? a
Oh,
publisher?
that was, again, that was a long time ago. I was approached by a literary agent named Russell Galen, who is still active. He's still my agent. He also represents quite a number of other people in the natural history field. Most notably David Sibley. He's so he's done quite a bit, and he's the one who approached me about the book that way back 18, 19 years ago. So that's so I actually didn't do that. So we talked, I did a proposal, we shopped it around, and that's where it was. So it's still possible. I'm sure, you can certainly approach Russell Galen. He is getting older, as we all are, so I'm not sure how many, but he's still active, so you might consider that. Okay.
That
You wanna-
is all for the questions.
Okay.